I'm sitting in my car outside the house where I grew up, gripping legal documents that will shatter my family's world forever. 3 weeks ago, my parents screamed those exact words at me while throwing my belongings onto the front lawn after my sister Amanda lost her job. She stood there smirking, asking why I couldn't just disappear already, while our parents blamed me for bringing shame to our family name. Tonight, I'm walking into their weekly dinner gathering and placing these ownership transfer papers right in the center of that familiar oak table, watching as their faces turn ghost white with the realization of what I've accomplished. Let me explain how we got to this breaking point, because understanding my family means understanding 28 years of watching my sister get away with absolutely everything while I carried the weight of responsibility on my shoulders alone. Amanda has always been the golden child in our household. 2 years younger than me, she possessed this magnetic charm that made our parents, Margaret and Robert, believe she could do no wrong. While I worked double shifts at a campus bookstore and tutored struggling students to pay my way through college, Amanda coasted through her communications degree on our parents' dime, partying every weekend and barely maintaining a C average. After graduation, she landed what seemed like a dream position at Preston Marketing Group, one of the most prestigious advertising firms in our city. For the past 3 years, she'd been living in a luxury downtown apartment, driving a brand new BMW, and constantly posting photos of expensive restaurant meals and designer handbags on social media. Our parents couldn't stop bragging about their successful marketing executive daughter to anyone who would listen. Meanwhile, I'd built my career the hard way, starting as a junior accountant at Miller & Associates and working my way up through sheer determination and countless overtime hours. I lived modestly in a small but comfortable apartment, drove a reliable Honda that I'd bought used, and saved every penny I could while building my professional reputation. 3 weeks ago, everything changed when Amanda burst through our parents' front door, mascara streaming down her cheeks, and her usually perfect hair disheveled. She collapsed dramatically onto the living room sofa, wailing about losing her job and being treated unfairly by her supervisors. "They're jealous of my success," she sobbed while our mother wrapped protective arms around her. "The whole company is corrupt, and they needed someone to blame for their failures." Our father paced the room furiously, his face red with indignation. "This is outrageous. We should sue them for wrongful termination. No one treats our daughter like this." But here's the twist that Amanda conveniently left out of her sob story. She hadn't been fired for poor performance or office politics. The truth was far more damaging than anyone in my family realized at that moment. Amanda had been terminated for embezzling $50,000 in client funds, systematically siphoning money from advertising budgets into personal accounts over the course of 18 months. I only learned this devastating detail because my accounting firm, Miller & Associates, had been contracted to perform the forensic audit that uncovered her theft. When my supervisor handed me the Preston marketing file, I nearly dropped it when I saw my own sister's name highlighted in red across multiple financial discrepancy reports. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Bank transfers, forged signatures, falsified expense reports, and a complex web of financial manipulation that showed Amanda had been stealing from her clients with calculated precision. The company had handed everything over to law enforcement, and criminal charges were already being prepared. But Amanda spun a completely different narrative for our parents, painting herself as the victim of corporate jealousy and office politics. She claimed her innovative marketing strategies had threatened her supervisors, leading them to fabricate charges against her character. "Why are you so quiet, Trina?" my mother demanded, noticing my stunned silence. "Your sister needs our support right now, not judgment." I found myself in an impossible position. Professional ethics prevented me from revealing confidential information from the audit, But watching my parents rally around Amanda while she lied so effortlessly made me feel physically sick. "I'm sure the truth will come out eventually," I said carefully, trying to remain neutral. That's when Amanda's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What's that supposed to mean? Are you suggesting I'm lying about what happened to me?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I just think there might be more to the story than we know right now." My father stepped forward protectively. "Your sister has been through enough without you adding doubt to her pain. Sometimes families need to stand together without asking questions." The conversation spiraled from there, with Amanda growing increasingly hysterical and our parents becoming more defensive. By the end of that evening, they'd somehow convinced themselves that I must have played a role in Amanda's termination, simply because my accounting firm worked with various businesses around the city. "This is too much of a coincidence," my mother declared. "Trina works with numbers and financial records. Maybe she said something to someone that hurt Amanda's reputation." It was completely illogical, but logic had never been my family's strongest suit when it came to protecting their favorite daughter. Within hours, they'd constructed an entire conspiracy theory where I had somehow sabotaged Amanda's career out of jealousy and resentment. The accusations stung because they were so unfair, but they also revealed something deeper about how my parents viewed me. Even after years of watching me work hard, make responsible choices, and build a stable life, they were ready to believe the worst about my character the moment it conflicted with Amanda's version of reality. That night marked the beginning of the end of my relationship with my family, though I didn't realize it yet. Amanda had planted seeds of suspicion that would grow into something much more destructive over the following weeks. The confrontation that finally severed my family ties happened exactly 2 weeks after Amanda's firing, during what should have been a routine Sunday dinner at our parents' house. I arrived expecting the usual tension, but found the atmosphere even more hostile than before. Amanda had clearly been working on our parents during my absence, because they greeted me with cold stares and barely concealed anger. "We've been thinking about your attitude lately," my father announced before I'd even removed my coat. "Your lack of support for Amanda during this crisis shows a real selfishness that we never expected from our own daughter." My mother nodded gravely. A real sister would be helping Amanda find new opportunities, not sitting back and watching her struggle. Amanda lounged in her favorite armchair wearing designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, watching the confrontation with barely concealed satisfaction. "I've offered to help in any way I can," I replied, though that wasn't entirely true. How could I help someone who'd been stealing from clients and lying about it? "Have you really?" Amanda's voice carried a mocking tone. "Because it seems like you've been pretty busy with your own life while I've been going through the worst experience imaginable." The conversation deteriorated rapidly from there. Every attempt I made to defend myself was met with more accusations and increasingly personal attacks. My parents brought up every perceived slight from the past year, painting a picture of a daughter who was jealous, unsupportive, and fundamentally selfish. "Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to spend your Sundays," my mother said finally. "This family needs healing, and your negative energy isn't helping anyone." That's when Amanda delivered the blow that still echoes in my mind. She looked directly at me with this cruel smile and said, "Honestly, why can't you just disappear already? Our lives would be so much easier without your constant judgment and criticism." My father nodded in agreement. "Your sister makes a valid point. Perhaps some distance would be good for everyone." "You want me to disappear?" I asked, hardly believing what I was hearing. "Yes," my mother shouted, her voice rising to a level I'd never heard before. "Go die for all we care. We're tired of walking on eggshells around your moods and your superiority complex." Those words hit me like physical blows. My own parents telling me to go die because I hadn't supported my sister's lies enthusiastically enough. They began gathering my personal belongings from around the house, items I'd left there over the years during visits and holidays. Photo albums, books, a sweater my grandmother had knitted for me. Small mementos that represented decades of family memories. Everything got thrown into garbage bags and tossed onto the front lawn like worthless trash. Neighbors came out of their houses to watch the spectacle, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and concern as my family publicly disowned me. Mrs. Patterson from next door looked especially uncomfortable, probably remembering all the times I'd helped her carry groceries or shovel her driveway during winter storms. I loaded my belongings into my car with as much dignity as I could manage, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Amanda watched from the front window, that same smug expression never leaving her face. "Don't bother coming back until you can apologize for your behavior," my father called out as I drove away. I spent that night at my friend Jenny's apartment, crying harder than I had since childhood. Jenny, who works as a nurse at the county hospital, held me while I sobbed and told me repeatedly that my family's behavior was completely unacceptable. "You don't kick your own child out for asking reasonable questions," she said firmly. "There's something seriously wrong with their priorities." For 3 days, I stayed with Jenny and tried to process what had happened. I'd lost my entire family in the span of one evening, all because I couldn't pretend to believe Amanda's lies about her termination. That's when attorney Harold Brennan called and changed everything. "Miss Thompson, I apologize for the delay in contacting you. The probate process for your grandmother Rose's estate has taken longer than expected, but we're finally ready to proceed with the will reading." I'd almost forgotten about Grandma Rose's will. She'd passed away 6 months earlier, and I'd assumed her modest savings would be divided equally among family members after funeral expenses were paid. "Could you come to my office Thursday afternoon? There are some significant assets to discuss." Harold's office occupied the 3rd floor of a downtown building that had seen better decades, with worn carpet and furniture that looked like it belonged in a different century. But his legal credentials were impressive, displayed prominently behind an enormous wooden desk that dominated the small room. "Your grandmother made some interesting changes to her will approximately 2 years before her death." He began opening a thick folder. "Changes that I believe will come as quite a surprise to your family." What he told me next completely upended everything I thought I knew about my grandmother's finances and feelings toward our family. Rose Thompson had been far wealthier than anyone realized. In addition to her modest savings account, she'd inherited substantial stock investments from her late husband's manufacturing business. Over the decades, those investments had grown into a portfolio worth over $1.2 million. More shocking than the money, however, were the specific provisions of her will. Rose had left the entire estate, including the family house where my parents had been living for the past 15 years, solely to me. She was very specific about her reasoning. Harold explained reading from legal documents. "Rose felt that you were the only family member who showed genuine care for her well-being during her final years, and she wanted to ensure your financial security." My hands trembled as I processed this information. The house alone was worth approximately $800,000, located in one of the city's most desirable neighborhoods. Combined with the investment portfolio, I'd suddenly become wealthy beyond anything I'd ever imagined. "But my parents have been living in that house since Grandma Rose moved to assisted living," I said. "Don't they have any legal claim to it?" Harold shook his head. "Your grandmother owned the house outright and had every legal right to leave it to whomever she chose. Your parents have been living there as guests, not as owners or tenants with any established rights." He handed me a thick envelope containing all the legal documents, property deeds, and financial account information. "You're now the sole owner of everything. What you choose to do with this inheritance is entirely your decision." I left Harold's office in a daze, clutching documents that represented more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. But more than the financial windfall, I was struck by the realization that my grandmother had seen something in me that my own parents couldn't recognize. Rose had always been kind to me during family gatherings, but I'd attributed her warmth to general grandmotherly affection. I never realized she'd been watching our family dynamics so carefully, or that she'd grown disgusted with how my parents treated me compared to Amanda. During the drive back to Jenny's apartment, I began formulating a plan. My family had told me to disappear, had thrown me out like garbage, had chosen Amanda's lies over my integrity. They'd made their choice very clear. Now it was time for them to live with the consequences of that choice. I decided to attend the next weekly family dinner as if our confrontation had never happened. This wasn't about reconciliation or forgiveness. This was about gathering intelligence and positioning myself strategically for what would come next. The manila envelope containing the property deeds and ownership transfer documents sat in my car, waiting for the perfect moment. I'd spent hours that week consulting with Harold about the legal implications of revealing my inheritance, and he'd assured me that my ownership was absolutely uncontestable. Your grandmother's will was properly executed and witnessed, he'd confirmed. No one can challenge your legal right to this property. Sunday evening arrived with unseasonably warm weather for late September. I parked across the street from the house that now belonged to me, studying its familiar features with new eyes. The wraparound porch that Grandma Rose had loved, the mature oak trees she'd planted as a young bride, the garden beds where she'd spent countless hours nurturing flowers and vegetables. My parents' cars sat in the driveway along with Amanda's BMW that somehow still looked pristine despite her supposed financial difficulties. Apparently, being unemployed hadn't impacted her ability to maintain an expensive vehicle. I walked up the front steps and used my key, which thankfully they hadn't thought to confiscate during their dramatic eviction performance. The familiar smells of my mother's cooking filled the hallway, bringing back memories of happier times when family dinners meant warmth and belonging instead of judgment and hostility. Trina. My father's voice carried surprise and displeasure. We weren't expecting you? I thought about what you said, and I'd like to apologize for my attitude, I replied, keeping my voice steady and humble. Family should stick together. Amanda appeared from the kitchen wearing a casual dress that probably cost more than most people's weekly paychecks. Her expression showed suspicion mixed with satisfaction, as if my presence confirmed her superiority in our ongoing conflict. Well, this is unexpected, she said. I wasn't sure you'd be mature enough to admit when you're wrong. My mother emerged next, wiping her hands on a dish towel and studying my face carefully. We appreciate you coming, but actions matter more than words. We'll need to see real changes in your behavior moving forward. I nodded submissively, playing the role of the chastened daughter seeking forgiveness. I understand completely. I want to make things right between us. During dinner, I listened quietly as my family discussed their plans and dreams, gathering information that would be crucial for what I had planned. The conversation revealed details that made my stomach turn with disgust. The travel agent showed us the most beautiful resort in Maui, my mother gushed, describing their upcoming vacation plans. 3 weeks of pure paradise, and we deserve every minute of relaxation. My father raised his wine glass in a mock toast. Thank goodness for Rose's generous spirit. Even from beyond the grave, she's still taking care of our family. How did you afford such an expensive trip? I asked innocently. Amanda laughed, the sound sharp and unpleasant. Mom and Dad have been using Grandma Rose's old bank card since she died. Smart thinking, really. Why let all that money sit unused when we could put it towards something meaningful? My parents exchanged satisfied glances, clearly pleased with their financial resourcefulness. We've spent close to $30,000 so far, my father admitted proudly. New furniture for the living room, Amanda's car payments this vacation, and some investments in our catering business. Rose would be happy knowing her money is being put to good use. The bank never questioned the card usage, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Why would they? My mother replied. We've been managing Rose's affairs for years. Everyone knows we're her family. What they were describing was textbook financial fraud committed against their own mother's estate. They'd been using credit cards and debit accounts that legally belonged to the probate court spending money that was never theirs to access. Plus, we'll inherit everything officially once the lawyers finish their paperwork, Amanda added. So really, we're just accessing our own money a little early? The casual way they discussed stealing from my grandmother's accounts made me feel physically ill. These people had thrown me out for questioning Amanda's version of events, while they were actively committing crimes against their own mother's memory. What about the house? I asked. Have you thought about what you'll do with this place long term? We're planning to stay here permanently, my father answered. Rose always intended for us to have this house. She told us so many times over the years. Actually, she left specific instructions about the house, my mother added. She wanted it to stay in the family, which obviously means us since we're her primary caregivers and closest relatives. Amanda nodded enthusiastically. This place will be perfect for entertaining once we renovate the kitchen and add that sunroom we've been planning. They'd constructed an entire fantasy about inheriting property that belonged to me while spending money they'd stolen from accounts that were legally mine as well. The depth of their presumption and criminal behavior was breathtaking. As dessert was served, I reached into my purse and withdrew the manila envelope I'd been carrying. Speaking of family finances and inheritances, there's something important I need to share with everyone. I placed the envelope in the exact center of the dinner table between the coffee cups and dessert plates. The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately as all three family members stared at the official legal documents visible through the envelope's clear window. What's that? My father asked, his voice suddenly cautious. These are some papers from Harold Brennan's law office. He's been handling Grandma Rose's estate, and there were some complications with the probate process that needed to be resolved. My mother reached for the envelope, but I placed my hand over it protectively. Before you look at these documents, I want to make sure everyone understands what they contain. The color began draining from their faces as they realized something significant was about to happen. Amanda's confident expression faltered, replaced by growing apprehension. Grandma Rose made some changes to her will that none of us knew about, I continued. Changes that affect this house, her financial accounts, and everyone's assumptions about her final wishes. What kind of changes? My father demanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. I opened the envelope and spread the legal documents across the table like a hand of cards, revealing a winning combination. Property deeds, bank account transfers, and official probate court stamps created an undeniable display of legal authority. Rose Thompson left her entire estate, including this house and all financial assets, to her granddaughter, Trina Thompson. That would be me. Every single thing you've been spending, planning, and dreaming about belongs to me now. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as comprehension dawned on their faces, followed quickly by terror as they realized the full implications of what I was telling them. They weren't inheriting anything. They'd been living in my house and spending my money without permission. Everything they'd planned and purchased had been funded by assets that legally belonged to me. And now I was sitting at my own dinner table in my own house watching the people who'd told me to go die realize that their entire world was about to change forever. The aftermath of my inheritance revelation created chaos that stretched far beyond that single dinner conversation. My father spent the following days frantically calling Harold Brennan's office, demanding explanations and threatening legal action, while my mother alternated between crying fits and angry rants about family loyalty. But Amanda's reaction was the most concerning. Instead of accepting reality or apologizing for her behavior, she immediately began scheming to find ways around my newfound legal ownership. Her desperation led her to make choices that would ultimately destroy any remaining possibility of family reconciliation. 3 days after I'd revealed the inheritance documents, Amanda made contact with my boyfriend Marcus Chen, a certified public accountant who worked for a different firm across town. What she tried to do next shocked even me, despite everything I'd learned about her character. Marcus and I had been dating for 8 months, building a relationship based on mutual respect and shared values. He was intelligent, hardworking, and possessed the kind of integrity that made him perfect for handling sensitive financial information. Those same qualities made him an ideal target for Amanda's manipulation attempts. She approached him at Benedetto's, an upscale restaurant downtown where young professionals often gathered for after-work drinks. Marcus was there with colleagues celebrating a successful audit completion when Amanda appeared at his table wearing a black dress that was inappropriately revealing for a casual encounter. "Marcus, what a surprise seeing you here," she said, as if their meeting was coincidental rather than carefully planned. "Could I speak with you privately? I'm having some serious problems and could really use advice from someone with your expertise." Marcus later described feeling immediately uncomfortable with her approach, but his natural politeness made him agree to a brief conversation. They moved to a quiet corner booth where Amanda launched into what she called her desperate situation. "I'm facing some terrible accusations at my old job." She began leaning forward in a way that emphasized her physical assets. "There are financial discrepancies that someone is trying to blame on me, but I think the real problem is much bigger than anyone realizes." She spun an elaborate story about discovering corruption at Preston Marketing Group, claiming she'd been fired for asking too many questions about suspicious accounting practices. According to Amanda's version, she was actually a whistleblower being silenced by powerful people who wanted to hide their crimes. The thing is, I think my sister Trina might have access to information that could help clear my name," Amanda continued. "Her accounting firm works with so many businesses, and she might have records that prove what I'm saying." Marcus remained skeptical, especially given what I'd told him about Amanda's embezzlement charges, but Amanda pressed forward with increasingly desperate proposals. "I know this sounds complicated, but would it be possible for you to access Trina's work files? Maybe look for anything related to Preston Marketing or their financial dealings." When Marcus explained that such access would be completely unethical and illegal, Amanda changed tactics. She moved closer to him in the booth, placing her hand on his arm and lowering her voice to what she apparently thought was a seductive whisper. "I understand this is asking a lot, but my entire future is at stake here. I'd be incredibly grateful to anyone who helped me through this crisis." The implication was clear, and Marcus felt deeply uncomfortable with the direction their conversation was taking. Amanda was essentially offering to trade sexual favors for confidential information that could help her escape the consequences of her crimes. "I think you're misunderstanding what I do for a living," Marcus replied firmly. "I can't access other people's work files, and I wouldn't even if I could." Amanda's friendly facade began cracking as she realized her seduction attempt wasn't working. "Look, I'm not asking you to break any major rules. Just peek at a few documents and maybe delete anything that might be damaging to my case." "Delete documents? Are you asking me to destroy evidence?" "I'm asking you to help someone who's being framed for crimes she didn't commit." Amanda shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Sometimes doing the right thing requires bending a few small rules." Marcus had heard enough. He stood to leave, but Amanda grabbed his wrist desperately. "Wait, please. I'll make it worth your while. We could go to my apartment right now and I'll show you exactly how grateful I can be." The sexual bribery attempt was now completely explicit, and Marcus felt disgusted by both her proposition and her willingness to betray me in such a personal way. Instead of responding, he pulled out his phone and began recording their conversation. "What are you doing?" Amanda demanded, noticing the device. "I'm documenting your attempt to bribe me into committing crimes," Marcus replied calmly. "Trina needs to know what kind of person she's dealing with." Amanda's face transformed with rage as she realized her plan had backfired completely. "You can't record me without permission. That's illegal." "Actually, this is a one-party consent state, which means I can legally record any conversation I'm part of," Marcus informed her. "And offering sexual services in exchange for criminal activity is something law enforcement might find very interesting." Amanda lunged for his phone, trying to grab it from his hands, but Marcus was quicker. He stepped away from the booth and continued recording as she made increasingly desperate threats. "If you show that recording to anyone, I'll tell the police you assaulted me," she screamed loud enough to attract attention from other restaurant patrons. "I'll say you tried to force yourself on me." "Go ahead and try," Marcus replied. "This recording proves exactly who initiated what, and I'm sure the restaurant's security cameras captured everything else." Amanda realized she'd lost control of the situation completely. Her attempted seduction had turned into documented evidence of bribery conspiracy and false accusation threats. Instead of gaining leverage over my finances, she'd created new legal problems for herself. Marcus left the restaurant and called me immediately, playing the recording over the phone while I listened in stunned silence. Hearing my sister offer to sleep with my boyfriend in exchange for helping her escape justice felt like a new kind of betrayal, somehow even worse than everything she'd already done to our family. "I'm so sorry you had to deal with that," I told Marcus after hearing the entire conversation. "I never imagined she'd sink to something so desperate and disgusting." "She's clearly panicking about her legal situation," Marcus replied. "People in that position often make increasingly bad decisions trying to avoid consequences." The recording provided me with powerful evidence of Amanda's character and her willingness to commit additional crimes to cover up her original embezzlement. It also showed that she had no remorse for her actions and no intention of accepting responsibility for the damage she'd caused. More importantly, it demonstrated that Amanda viewed other people, including family members, as tools to be manipulated for her benefit. She'd been willing to destroy my relationship and hurt Marcus professionally, all to protect herself from facing justice for crimes she'd actually committed. I made copies of the recording and scheduled another meeting with Harold Brennan. Amanda's attempted bribery and sexual coercion might not be directly related to the inheritance dispute, but they certainly painted a clear picture of someone who couldn't be trusted with financial responsibility or family loyalty. As I listened to the recording again that evening, I felt the last traces of sympathy for my sister finally disappear. She'd chosen her path deliberately and repeatedly, burning bridges and hurting innocent people to protect her own interests. Now it was time for her to face the full consequences of those choices, and I was no longer going to feel guilty about letting justice run its course. The recording of Amanda's attempted bribery opened doors I hadn't expected when Marcus and I decided to report her behavior to the authorities. What started as a simple complaint about attempted corruption quickly became part of a much larger criminal investigation that revealed the true scope of Amanda's criminal activities. Detective Sarah Coleman from the Financial Crimes Division contacted me 2 days after Marcus filed his report. A 15-year veteran of the police force with expertise in white-collar crime, Detective Coleman had been investigating a series of related embezzlement cases across multiple businesses in our city. "Your sister's case at Preston Marketing Group isn't isolated," she explained during our meeting at the downtown police station. "We've identified at least 6 other companies where similar theft patterns occurred, all involving young employees with substantial personal debt." Coleman showed me a complex chart mapping connections between various suspects' victims and financial institutions. Amanda's name appeared near the center of the web, connected to several other individuals through shared bank accounts and suspicious transaction patterns. "We believe your sister was recruited into an organized fraud network that targets specific types of employees," Coleman continued. They look for people with gambling problems, expensive lifestyle habits, or family pressure to maintain appearances beyond their actual income. The detective explained that Amanda's embezzlement at Preston Marketing followed a sophisticated template that had been used successfully at other companies. The perpetrators would identify vulnerable employees, provide them with detailed instructions for accessing client funds, and then help them cover their tracks using complex money laundering techniques. The beauty of their system from a criminal perspective is that each individual employee only steals relatively small amounts over extended periods, Coleman said. By the time companies notice the discrepancies, hundreds of thousands of dollars have been moved through multiple accounts and become very difficult to trace. Amanda's $50,000 theft was actually modest compared to some of the other cases they'd uncovered. One suspect had stolen over $200,000 from a law firm's client trust accounts, while another had diverted nearly $300,000 from a medical practice's insurance payments. What makes your sister's case particularly valuable to our investigation is the recording your boyfriend provided, Coleman explained. It shows clear consciousness of guilt and willingness to commit additional crimes to avoid prosecution. That kind of evidence can be very persuasive when we're trying to convince other defendants to cooperate with law enforcement. The detective revealed that Amanda's financial situation was far more desperate than our family had realized. She owed approximately $40,000 to illegal bookmakers who operated high-stakes poker games in private clubs around the city. These weren't friendly neighborhood card games, but serious criminal enterprises run by people who used violence to collect debts. Your sister got involved with these gambling operations about 2 years ago, Coleman said. Our informants tell us she was initially successful winning enough money to pay for her expensive apartment and car, but gambling addiction follows predictable patterns, and she eventually began losing far more than she could afford. The bookmakers had given Amanda 60 days to repay her debts or face severe physical consequences. Faced with threats to her safety, she'd agreed to participate in the embezzlement scheme as a way to generate quick cash for debt repayment. We have surveillance footage of your sister meeting with known associates of this criminal organization. Coleman continued showing me grainy photographs of Amanda talking with dangerous-looking men in restaurant parking lots. These people don't negotiate payment plans or accept partial payments. They expect full repayment with interest, or they take collateral in very unpleasant ways. The detective's revelation put Amanda's behavior over the past few months into a completely different context. Her increasingly desperate actions, her willingness to lie to our family, and her attempted seduction of Marcus all made sense when viewed as the actions of someone facing genuine physical danger from criminal associates. What we need from your sister is detailed information about how this network operates, Coleman explained. Names, locations, account numbers, communication methods, and anything else that could help us dismantle the entire organization. The detective offered Amanda a potential deal: cooperate fully with the investigation, provide testimony against the other conspirators, and potentially enter witness protection in exchange for reduced charges and safety from retaliation. But she has to make this decision quickly, Coleman warned. Every day she delays increases the risk that the other suspects will realize law enforcement is closing in and take steps to protect themselves, possibly including silencing potential witnesses. I asked about the timeline for bringing charges against Amanda and the other suspects. Coleman explained that the investigation was nearly complete, with arrest warrants being prepared for 7 individuals, including my sister. We're planning to execute simultaneous arrests next week, she said. That prevents any of the suspects from warning the others or destroying evidence once they realize we're onto them. The detective also had disturbing news about the illegal bookmakers who were pressuring Amanda for debt repayment. Recent intelligence suggested they were planning to escalate their collection efforts, possibly including kidnapping or physical assault if payment wasn't received within the next few days. Your sister is in real danger, whether she cooperates with us or not, Coleman warned. These people don't care about her family connections or her ability to eventually pay. They view unpaid debts as challenges to their authority that must be answered with violence. This information created a moral dilemma that I hadn't anticipated. Despite everything Amanda had done to hurt our family, she was still my sister, and the thought of her being seriously injured by criminal associates was deeply troubling. If Amanda agrees to cooperate, what kind of protection can you provide? I asked. Full witness protection services, including relocation, new identity, and financial support, while she rebuilds her life in a different state, Coleman replied, but only if she provides complete and truthful testimony against the entire network. The detective gave me her contact information and asked me to encourage Amanda to reach out within the next 48 hours. After that point, the offer of cooperation and protection would likely be withdrawn as the investigation moved into its final phase. Driving home from the police station, I struggled with conflicting emotions about my sister's situation. She'd brought these problems on herself through a series of increasingly bad decisions, but the consequences she was facing seemed disproportionately severe. More troubling was the realization that our parents had no idea about the true extent of Amanda's criminal involvement or the physical danger she was facing. They were still living in denial about her embezzlement charges, completely unaware that her life might literally be in jeopardy. That evening, I called Harold Brennan to discuss how Amanda's criminal case might affect the inheritance dispute. He assured me that her legal troubles wouldn't impact my ownership of Grandma Rose's estate, but he suggested that family safety considerations might influence how I chose to handle the property situation. If your sister enters witness protection, your parents might be facing this crisis completely alone, he pointed out. That could change how you want to approach the housing situation, depending on your feelings about their well-being. I spent the night weighing my options and trying to decide whether family loyalty required me to warn Amanda about the impending arrests, even after everything she'd done to hurt me and betray our family's trust. The decision would have to be made quickly because Detective Coleman's timeline meant that everything was about to change for all of us, whether we were prepared or not. While I was learning about Amanda's involvement with criminal organizations, another devastating truth about my family's situation came to light through an unexpected source. Barbara Nielsen, a longtime family friend who owned a flower shop downtown, called me with information that completely changed my understanding of my parents' financial circumstances. Oh, Trina, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly, but I'm worried about your parents, Barbara said. Her voice carried the careful tone of someone delivering bad news. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but they've been asking everyone they know for emergency loans. Barbara had known our family for over 20 years, supplying flowers for graduations, anniversaries, and holiday celebrations. She'd watched Amanda and me grow up, and her loyalty to our family made her reluctant to share private information. But her concern for my parents' well-being outweighed her discretion. They came to my shop 3 days ago asking to borrow $15,000, she continued. When I asked what the emergency was, they said their catering business was facing some temporary cash flow problems. This revelation shocked me because I'd always believed my parents' catering company was financially stable. They'd built Sunset Celebrations over 12 years, developing a solid reputation for wedding receptions and corporate events. During family dinners, they often bragged about their success and expanding client base. How serious are their financial problems? I asked Barbara. Worse than they're admitting to anyone, she replied. I talked to several other business owners who've been approached for loans. Your parents owe money to their food suppliers, their rental company, and even their insurance provider. They're at least 3 months behind on most of their business expenses. Barbara explained that my parents had been living beyond their means for several years, using business credit to fund personal expenses and making increasingly risky financial decisions. The situation had deteriorated rapidly over the past 6 months, as they'd borrowed heavily to support Amanda's expensive lifestyle. They kept telling people that Amanda's marketing salary was so high that family financial problems were temporary, Barbara said. They seemed to believe she'd be able to help them once she got established in her career. The irony was devastating. My parents had financially overextended themselves trying to keep up with Amanda's fraudulent success story, never realizing that her apparent prosperity was funded by stolen money that would inevitably be discovered. "Do you know how much debt they've accumulated?" I asked. Barbara hesitated before answering. "From what I've heard through the business community, they owe somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 to various creditors. That's just business debt, not including personal expenses or credit card balances." This information explained my parents' intense focus on Grandma Rose's inheritance. They weren't just hoping for a financial windfall to improve their lifestyle. They were desperately counting on that money to save their business and avoid bankruptcy. "There's something else you should know," Barbara added reluctantly. "They've been telling people that the inheritance is definitely coming through and that they'll be able to repay everyone once the legal paperwork is finalized." My parents had been using my inheritance as collateral for loans and promises, spreading word throughout the business community that they'd soon have access to hundreds of thousands of dollars from Grandma Rose's estate. "They've already committed that money to repaying debts and expanding their catering operation," Barbara explained. "I don't think they have any backup plan if the inheritance doesn't materialize the way they expect." The conversation with Barbara forced me to confront the full scope of what my inheritance revelation had accomplished. By claiming ownership of Grandma Rose's estate, I hadn't just disappointed my parents' expectations, I'd potentially destroyed their ability to avoid financial ruin. That afternoon, I drove past their catering company's commercial kitchen to see the situation for myself. The parking lot that should have been busy with delivery trucks and staff vehicles was nearly empty. A notice from the county health department was taped to the front door indicating violations that suggested they couldn't afford proper maintenance or supplies. Through the windows, I could see equipment that looked old and poorly maintained. The vibrant business I remembered from childhood visits had clearly deteriorated into a struggling operation held together by debt and false optimism. I called several suppliers whose business cards were displayed in the kitchen's front office. Most were reluctant to discuss specific account details, but their general comments painted a picture of a company that had lost credibility within the industry. "Let's just say we require payment in advance for any future orders," one food distributor told me diplomatically. "There have been some challenges with timely payment over recent months." Another supplier was more direct. "Your parents seem like nice people, but they've been making promises about payment that they haven't been able to keep. We can't continue extending credit indefinitely." The financial investigation revealed that my parents had been funding Amanda's lifestyle by sacrificing their business's stability and their professional reputation. They'd prioritized their daughter's appearance of success over the practical requirements of running a viable company. Even worse, they'd apparently believed Amanda's lies about her marketing career so completely that they'd made financial commitments based on her imaginary future earning potential. They'd expected her to eventually contribute to family finances once she was fully established in her profession. Learning about my parents' financial crisis created a new layer of complexity in my decision-making process. While I was angry about how they treated me, I hadn't intended to destroy their livelihood or force them into bankruptcy. The inheritance that legally belonged to me could easily solve their business problems and save them from financial ruin. But giving them access to that money would also validate their decision to throw me out and support Amanda's lies over my integrity. That evening, I sat in my apartment considering the implications of my choices. I could use my inheritance to rescue my parents' business, demonstrating forgiveness and family loyalty. or I could allow them to face the consequences of their financial mismanagement and their decision to prioritize Amanda over everyone else. The decision was complicated by the knowledge that their financial problems weren't entirely their fault. They'd been manipulated by Amanda's fraudulent lifestyle just as much as I'd been hurt by her lies and their favoritism. But I also recognize that enabling their poor decision-making might not actually help them in the long run. Sometimes people needed to face the full consequences of their choices in order to learn from their mistakes and change their behavior patterns. As I struggled with these competing considerations, I realized that the inheritance dispute had become about much more than money or property ownership. It had become a test of family loyalty, personal integrity, and the complex relationship between forgiveness and accountability. Whatever decision I made would permanently alter our family dynamics and determine whether reconciliation was possible or whether some bridges were too damaged to rebuild. The emotional complexity of my family's financial crisis led me to seek a deeper understanding of Grandma Rose's motivations for changing her will. I'd been so focused on the legal and financial implications of my inheritance that I hadn't fully processed the personal message she'd been trying to send through her final decisions. Harold Brennan had mentioned that Rose left specific instructions about her reasoning, but I'd been too overwhelmed to ask for details during our initial meeting. Now, with Amanda facing criminal charges and my parents' business collapsing, I needed to understand what my grandmother had actually witnessed during her final years. Could I see any personal documents or letters that Grandma Rose left? I asked Harold during a follow-up appointment. I'd like to understand her perspective on our family situation. Harold retrieved a sealed envelope from his office safe marked with instructions that it should be given to me after the inheritance documents had been processed. Your grandmother was very thorough in documenting her observations and feelings, he said. I think you'll find her words both illuminating and disturbing. The envelope contained a leather-bound journal that Rose had apparently kept during the last 2 years of her life, along with several letters she'd written but never sent. The journal entries began shortly after she'd moved into assisted living, when she'd started noticing troubling patterns in how different family members treated her. The first entries broke my heart. Rose wrote about feeling abandoned and confused by the sudden decrease in communication from family members. She'd expected more visits and phone calls after moving into the care facility, but instead found herself increasingly isolated from the people she'd loved and supported for decades. Margaret comes by twice a week, but her visits feel more like obligations than genuine care, Rose had written. She spends most of her time asking about my finances and suggesting changes to my will. When I try to talk about my daily life or my feelings about living here, she becomes impatient and changes the subject. More troubling were Rose's descriptions of my mother's attitude toward her financial independence. Margaret had apparently been pressuring Rose to transfer ownership of the house and other assets while she was still alive, claiming it would simplify things for everyone and reduce estate taxes. Margaret keeps saying that I should trust her to handle my affairs because she knows what's best for the family, Rose wrote. But when I ask specific questions about how she plans to manage my money, she becomes evasive and irritated. Something doesn't feel right about her eagerness to control my finances. The journal entries revealed a pattern of emotional manipulation that I hadn't recognized during family gatherings. My mother had been systematically isolating Rose from outside relationships while pressuring her to make financial decisions that would benefit Margaret's family. Margaret told me that Trina is too busy with her career to spend time with elderly relatives, Rose wrote, but I remember how much Trina used to enjoy our conversations about gardening and cooking. Has she really changed so much, or is Margaret keeping us apart for her own reasons? This revelation devastated me because I genuinely tried to maintain a relationship with my grandmother during her final years. I'd called regularly, sent birthday and holiday cards, and visited whenever my work schedule allowed. But apparently, my mother had been intercepting communications and discouraging Rose from reaching out to me directly. I tried calling Trina last week, but Margaret said she'd moved and changed her phone number without telling anyone, Rose had written. That seems strange, because Trina has always been responsible about staying in touch. I asked Margaret for her new contact information, but she said she'd handle passing along any messages I wanted to send. My phone number hadn't changed in 3 years, and I'd certainly never moved without informing my grandmother. Margaret had been lying to both of us, preventing communication that might have interfered with her plans to inherit Rose's assets. The journal entries from Rose's final months painted an even darker picture of my mother's behavior. Rose described feeling like a prisoner in her own relationships, unable to maintain independent contact with friends or family members outside of Margaret's supervision. Margaret takes my mail before I can read it, saying she's protecting me from stress and complicated decisions, Rose wrote, but I'm not senile or incompetent. I should be allowed to receive my own correspondence and make my own choices about who I want to communicate with. Rose had also documented instances where Margaret had taken money from her purse without asking, claiming she was organizing Rose's finances or paying for necessary expenses that were never clearly explained. When Rose questioned these withdrawals, Margaret would become defensive and accuse her mother of being paranoid or forgetful. I know Margaret took $40 from my wallet yesterday, but when I asked about it, she said I must have spent the money and forgotten about it, Rose wrote. She suggested that I might be developing memory problems and should consider letting her handle all my financial transactions going forward. The manipulation was sophisticated and cruel, designed to make Rose question her own mental capabilities while gradually transferring control of her resources to Margaret. If successful, this psychological campaign would have eventually convinced Rose that she was incompetent to manage her own affairs. But Rose had been far more aware of what was happening than Margaret realized. The journal entries showed clear, rational thinking and detailed documentation of suspicious incidents. Rose knew she was being manipulated. She just hadn't known how to protect herself from family members she'd trusted for decades. I've decided to change my will without telling Margaret about the modifications, Rose wrote in one of her final entries. I want to make sure my assets go to the family member who has shown genuine love and respect for my independence. Trina has never pressured me for money or tried to control my decisions. She deserves to benefit from a lifetime of savings and careful financial planning. Rose's letters, which she'd written but never sent, provided additional evidence of how much she'd valued our relationship and how hurt she'd been by the barriers Margaret had created between us. My dearest Trina, one letter began, I miss our conversations more than you know. I understand that your career keeps you busy, but I hope you'll find time to visit before too much more time passes. There are things I want to tell you about our family that you need to know. Another letter revealed Rose's growing concern about Amanda's character and her parents' enabling behavior. I worry about the values your parents are teaching Amanda through their unconditional support of her choices. Real love sometimes requires setting boundaries and expecting accountability, not just providing endless resources for irresponsible behavior. Reading these documents felt like receiving messages from beyond the grave, revealing truths that had been hidden throughout my grandmother's final years. Rose had died believing I'd abandoned her, when the reality was that my mother had systematically destroyed our ability to maintain contact. The journal also contained specific observations about Amanda's character that proved Rose had seen through her granddaughter's manipulative behavior long before the rest of the family recognized any problems. Amanda visited last month asking for a loan to cover some temporary financial difficulties, Rose had written. When I asked for details about what kind of help she needed, her explanation was vague and contradictory. She became angry when I suggested she might benefit from financial counseling or a more modest lifestyle. That reaction told me everything I needed to know about her character and her relationship with money. Rose had apparently refused to give Amanda any financial assistance, recognizing that such help would only enable poor decision-making rather than encouraging genuine improvement. Amanda's anger about being denied easy money had revealed her sense of entitlement and her willingness to manipulate elderly relatives for financial gain. These discoveries completely reframed my understanding of the inheritance decision. Rose hadn't changed her will because she loved me more than other family members. She'd made those changes to protect her assets from being used to enable destructive behavior patterns that were harming everyone involved. She'd recognized that Margaret and Robert were raising a daughter who expected constant financial support without accountability, and she'd refused to contribute to that cycle through her estate planning. By leaving everything to me, Rose had made a statement about values, responsibility, and the difference between enabling and genuine love. As I finished reading the journal, I felt both heartbroken about the loneliness Rose had experienced and validated in my decision to claim ownership of the inheritance. My grandmother had made her choice based on careful observation of our family dynamics, and honoring her wishes meant accepting the responsibility she'd entrusted to me. The journal also provided me with ammunition I could use if my parents or Amanda challenged the will in court. Rose's detailed documentation of their behavior, combined with her clear reasoning for changing the inheritance, would make any legal challenge extremely difficult to pursue successfully. But more than legal protection, the journal gave me something precious, the knowledge that Rose had truly understood and appreciated our relationship, even when Margaret's manipulation had prevented us from expressing that connection directly. Now, I had a responsibility to use Rose's gift in a way that would honor her memory and reflect the values she'd tried to instill in our family, even when those values had been rejected by the people who claimed to love her most. Armed with the devastating revelations from Rose's journal and the knowledge of my family's deepening legal and financial troubles, I realized that a direct confrontation was inevitable. Amanda's criminal case was moving forward regardless of family dynamics, and my parents' business was failing regardless of their expectations about inheritance money. The confrontation came sooner and more violently than I'd anticipated when Amanda cornered me in the parking lot of Riverside Grocery, the supermarket where I'd shopped since childhood. I was loading groceries into my car when she appeared seemingly from nowhere, her face twisted with an anger I'd never seen before. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she snarled, positioning herself between me and my car door. "Swooping in with your legal papers and destroying everything our family has worked for." Amanda looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup was smeared, and she wore wrinkled clothes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. The stress of facing criminal charges while being pressured by dangerous creditors was clearly taking a serious toll on her mental and physical condition. "I didn't destroy anything," I replied calmly. "I simply claimed an inheritance that legally belongs to me." "Legally belongs to you." Amanda's voice rose to a shriek that attracted attention from other shoppers. "You manipulated a senile old woman into changing her will. You took advantage of Grandma Rose when she wasn't thinking clearly." "Rose wasn't senile, and you know it. She documented her reasons for changing the will very thoroughly." Amanda's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What documentation? What are you talking about?" I made the strategic decision to reveal some of what I'd learned from Rose's journal, calculating that the truth might shock Amanda into recognizing the reality of her situation. "Grandma Rose kept detailed records of how our family treated her during her final years," I said. "She wrote about Mom stealing money from her purse, about being prevented from communicating with people she wanted to talk to, and about your attempts to manipulate her into giving you financial support." "You're lying!" Amanda spat, but her expression showed growing uncertainty. She specifically wrote about your visit, asking for money to cover your temporary financial difficulties. She said your explanation was vague and contradictory, and that you became angry when she suggested you might need financial counseling. Amanda's face went pale as she realized that Rose had been far more aware of family dynamics than anyone had suspected. If Rose had documented Amanda's attempts at manipulation, those records could be used as evidence in any legal proceedings. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that you've destroyed our family, Amanda said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Mom and Dad are facing bankruptcy because of your selfishness. Mom and Dad are facing bankruptcy because they spent money they didn't have on a lifestyle they couldn't afford, I corrected. They believed your lies about your marketing career and made financial decisions based on your imaginary success. My career isn't imaginary. I was succeeding until jealous people destroyed my reputation. Amanda, you were caught stealing $50,000 from client accounts. There's forensic evidence of systematic embezzlement over 18 months. Your success was built on money you stole from the people who trusted you. Amanda's composure finally cracked completely. Shut up! You don't know anything about what I was facing or why I made those choices. She lunged forward and grabbed my purse, apparently trying to search for the inheritance documents or my car keys. When I pulled back to protect my belongings, Amanda escalated the conflict by clawing at my face with her fingernails. You're going to give me those papers and fix the situation right now, she screamed, drawing blood from my left cheek with her attack. I pushed her away hard enough to break her grip on my purse, but Amanda responded by grabbing a handful of my hair and trying to slam my head against my car's roof. Other shoppers began gathering around us, some calling for security, while others shouted for us to stop fighting. You're going to destroy your entire life over this inheritance, Amanda yelled, still trying to physically overpower me. I'll make sure everyone knows what a selfish, vindictive person you really are. Store security guard Kevin Walsh and customer Tony Rodriguez, a mechanic who'd been loading motor oil into his truck, intervened to separate us before Amanda could cause serious injury. Kevin held Amanda back while Tony made sure I was safely away from her reach. Sub, she attacked me, Amanda screamed to anyone who would listen. She provoked me and then assaulted me when I tried to defend myself. That's not what happened, Tony said firmly. I saw the whole thing from my truck. This lady was loading groceries when you approached her. You grabbed her stuff first, then you scratched her face when she tried to get away. Retired teacher Linda Walsh, who'd been returning her shopping cart, confirmed Tony's account. The blonde woman was definitely the aggressor. She was screaming and trying to take things from the other woman's purse. Kevin called the police while I used my phone to document the scratches on my face and the torn strap on my purse where Amanda had grabbed it. Several other witnesses provided their contact information, recognizing that their testimony might be needed for legal proceedings. I'm not done with this, Amanda warned as police sirens became audible in the distance. You think you've won something, but you have no idea what you've started. Officers Jennifer Martinez and Robert Kim arrived within minutes, separating us for individual interviews. Officer Martinez took my statement, while Officer Kim spoke with Amanda and the witnesses who'd observed our confrontation. This appears to be related to a family financial dispute, Officer Martinez noted after hearing my explanation of recent events. But physical assault is still a crime regardless of the underlying circumstances. Amanda tried to convince Officer Kim that I'd been the aggressor, but the witness statements contradicted her version of events. Security cameras from the grocery store parking lot had also captured most of the incident, providing objective evidence of who had initiated the physical confrontation. Oh boy, based on witness testimony and video evidence, you're being arrested for battery and attempted theft. Officer Kim informed Amanda, you have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. Amanda's arrest in the grocery store parking lot, witnessed by numerous community members, represented another public humiliation that would damage her reputation even further. Local residents who knew our family would spread word about the incident, adding to the social consequences she was already facing from her embezzlement charges. As Amanda was placed in handcuffs and loaded into a police car, she continued screaming threats and accusations. "This isn't over, Trina. You think you've destroyed my life, but I'll find a way to make you pay for what you've done to our family." Tony Rodriguez shook his head as he watched the police car drive away. "Some people just can't accept responsibility for their own choices," he said. "They'd rather blame everyone else than look in the mirror and change their behavior." Linda Walsh agreed, patting my shoulder sympathetically. "Family disputes can be the most painful kind of conflict, but that doesn't excuse physical violence. You handled yourself well under very difficult circumstances." The incident report and witness statements provided me with additional evidence of Amanda's unstable violent behavior that could be useful in future legal proceedings. More importantly, her public assault had demonstrated to our entire community that she was willing to use physical intimidation to try to get what she wanted. Driving home with scratches on my face and a damaged purse, I realized that Amanda's desperation was escalating beyond anything I'd anticipated. Her willingness to physically attack me in public suggested that she might be capable of even more dangerous behavior as her legal and financial situation continued deteriorating. That evening, I called Detective Coleman to report the assault and ask about additional protection options. Amanda's behavior was becoming increasingly unpredictable, and I was concerned about what she might attempt next as her world continued falling apart around her. Amanda's arrest for assaulting me in the grocery store parking lot sent shockwaves through my parents that manifested in increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of the inheritance situation. Rather than recognizing that their daughter's behavior was spiraling out of control, Margaret and Robert chose to blame me for provoking Amanda and destroying the family unity. Their response revealed just how deep their denial ran and how far they were willing to go to protect Amanda from the consequences of her choices, even when those choices included criminal violence against their other daughter. 2 days after Amanda's arrest, I received a phone call from someone claiming to be attorney Jonathan Pierce, who said he represented the estate planning firm that had originally handled Grandma Rose's will. His professional tone and apparent knowledge of legal terminology initially made him seem credible. "Miss Thompson, I'm calling because our office has discovered some serious irregularities in your grandmother's estate proceedings," Pierce said. "There appears to have been a significant error in the will interpretation that needs to be corrected immediately." Pierce claimed that Harold Brennan had misunderstood Rose's intentions and that the inheritance should actually be divided among all family members, according to an earlier version of the will. He suggested meeting at Café Luna, a popular coffee shop downtown, to discuss corrective measures that would resolve the legal problems. "Time is critical here," Pierce emphasized. "If we don't address these issues within the next few days, the entire estate could be tied up in probate court for years, while lawyers sort through the complications." Something about his urgency and his reluctance to provide specific details about his law firm made me suspicious, but I agreed to meet him to see what information he might provide. I arrived at Café Luna early and chose a table where I could observe Pierce's behavior without being trapped in a private conversation. The man who approached my table looked nothing like a successful estate attorney. Jonathan Pierce appeared to be in his 40s, wearing an ill-fitting suit that seemed to have been purchased at a discount store. His business cards were obviously printed on home computer equipment, and his briefcase looked like something from a flea market. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Pierce said, sitting down without being invited and immediately spreading papers across our small table. "These documents will clarify the situation with your grandmother's will." The papers he showed me were poorly forged copies of legal forms that contained numerous spelling errors, incorrect legal terminology, and formatting that didn't match authentic court documents. Anyone with basic legal knowledge would immediately recognize them as fraudulent. According to these corrected records, your grandmother intended to divide her estate equally among her children and grandchildren, Pierce explained. The documents that Harold Brennan showed you were based on an outdated version of her will that doesn't reflect her final wishes. Pierce's explanation was completely contradicted by everything Harold Brennan had told me about the probate process and the authentication of Rose's will. More importantly, the forged documents he was showing me contained factual errors about dates, account numbers, and legal procedures that proved they were fake. What I need you to do is sign this corrective affidavit acknowledging the error and agreeing to redistribute the inheritance according to your grandmother's true intentions. Pierce continued producing a document that would essentially transfer ownership of Rose's entire estate back to my parents. Why would I need to sign anything, I asked. If there was a genuine legal error, wouldn't that be handled through the courts rather than through a coffee shop meeting? Pierce's demeanor became more aggressive as he realized I wasn't going to be easily manipulated. Look, I'm trying to help your family avoid expensive legal battles and years of uncertainty. But if you're not willing to cooperate, things could become much more complicated. Are you threatening me? I asked directly. I'm explaining the reality of your situation, Pierce replied. Your parents have significant debts and financial obligations based on their expectation of inheriting your grandmother's estate. If you continue to claim ownership of assets that legally belong to them, you could be held responsible for the financial damage you're causing. His threat revealed the true purpose of this meeting. My parents were so desperate to access Rose's inheritance that they'd hired someone to create fraudulent legal documents and pressure me into surrendering my legitimate ownership rights. Could I see your bar association identification? I requested. I'd like to verify your credentials before signing anything. Pierce fumbled through his briefcase, claiming he'd forgotten his identification in his office. But I can provide references and contact information for my firm, he said, pulling out another obviously fake business card. Instead of continuing the charade, I took photos of his forged documents and fake business cards with my phone. Pierce became visibly nervous as he realized I was documenting evidence of his fraudulent activities. What are you doing? He demanded. Creating evidence of attempted fraud, I replied calmly. Everything you've shown me today is fake, and your attempt to trick me into signing away my inheritance constitutes criminal fraud. Pierce began gathering his papers frantically, apparently realizing that his scheme had backfired. You're making a serious mistake. Your parents are offering you a reasonable solution to a complicated family problem. My parents are committing fraud by hiring you to create fake legal documents, I corrected, and you're committing multiple crimes by impersonating an attorney and attempting to defraud me of my inheritance. Pierce left the coffee shop quickly, but I had already photographed his license plate number and gathered enough evidence to report the incident to both Harold Brennan and Detective Coleman. The fake attorney scheme represented a new low in my parents' behavior, showing their willingness to commit serious crimes rather than accept the reality of their financial situation. That afternoon, I called Harold Brennan to verify that Jonathan Pierce wasn't affiliated with any legitimate law firm. Harold confirmed that no such person existed in the State Bar Association, and that the documents Pierce had shown me were laughably obvious forgeries. Your parents are making their legal situation much worse with these kinds of schemes, Harold warned. Attempted fraud related to estate proceedings can result in serious criminal charges and civil penalties. Harold suggested that I file a police report about the fake attorney incident, both to protect myself from future manipulation attempts and to create official documentation of my parents' increasingly criminal behavior. Detective Coleman was very interested in the fake attorney scheme when I reported it to her office. This fits a pattern of escalating criminal behavior that we've been observing in families facing financial crisis, she explained. When people become desperate enough, they often convince themselves that illegal activities are justified by their circumstances. Coleman opened an investigation into Jonathan Pierce's identity and his connection to my parents, though she warned that proving their involvement might be difficult if Pierce had been hired through intermediaries or cash payments. What's particularly concerning is that this scheme required advanced planning and coordination, Coleman noted. Your parents didn't just make a spur-of-the-moment bad decision. They actively planned to defraud you of your inheritance using forged documents and impersonation. The fake attorney incident destroyed any remaining possibility that my relationship with my parents could be repaired through reasonable discussion or compromise. They demonstrated that they were willing to commit serious crimes rather than accept responsibility for their financial mismanagement or acknowledge my legitimate ownership of Rose's estate. More troubling was the realization that my parents' desperation was likely to lead to additional criminal schemes as their business situation continued deteriorating. They'd crossed the line from poor judgment into active criminality, and there was no way to predict how far they might be willing to go to access money they believed belonged to them. That evening, I double-checked the locks on my apartment and considered whether I needed to take additional security precautions. My family members were no longer just emotionally manipulative. They'd become genuinely dangerous people who were willing to use fraud threats and possibly violence to get what they wanted. The inheritance that was supposed to represent Grandma Rose's love and support had instead become the catalyst for revealing the true character of everyone in my family. And that revelation was far more painful than I'd ever imagined possible. The cascade of criminal behavior from my family members couldn't remain hidden in a city the size of ours, where business relationships and social connections created networks that spread information quickly. What started as private family drama soon became very public scandal that destroyed my parents' reputation and made Amanda's crimes front-page news. The turning point came when investigative reporter Jessica Chang from the Metro Herald decided to write a comprehensive exposé about the Preston marketing embezzlement case and its connection to the larger fraud ring that Detective Coleman had been investigating. Jessica had built her career covering financial crimes and corruption, and Amanda's case provided her with a perfect opportunity to explore how organized criminal networks recruited seemingly respectable young professionals. Financial fraud in professional settings has become increasingly sophisticated, Jessica explained when she called to interview me for background information. Your sister's case illustrates how criminal organizations target vulnerable individuals and exploit their personal weaknesses to gain access to business accounts. The article that appeared on the front page of Sunday's Metro Herald contained Amanda's mugshot alongside detailed information about her embezzlement activities, her connections to illegal gambling operations, and her subsequent arrest for assaulting me in the grocery store parking lot. But Jessica's investigation had uncovered additional details that made the story even more damaging to my family's reputation. Local marketing executive caught in multi-company fraud ring, read the headline, followed by subheadings that detailed Amanda's gambling debts, her recruitment by organized criminals, and her family's ongoing legal troubles related to estate fraud and financial manipulation. Jessica had interviewed several Preston marketing clients whose money Amanda had stolen, giving them an opportunity to describe how her crimes had affected their small businesses and personal finances. Maria Santos, who owned a local bakery, explained how Amanda's theft of her advertising budget had forced her to cancel marketing campaigns during her busiest season. We trusted her with money we couldn't afford to lose, Maria told the newspaper. Small business owners don't have the luxury of absorbing that kind of financial loss without serious consequences. The article also detailed my parents' fraudulent scheme, with the fake attorney describing how they'd attempted to use forged documents to steal my inheritance. Jessica had somehow obtained copies of the fake legal papers that Jonathan Pierce had shown me, reproducing them in the newspaper alongside analysis from real attorneys explaining why they were obvious forgeries. The Thompson family's descent into criminal behavior appears to have been driven by financial desperation and an inability to accept responsibility for poor decision-making, Jessica wrote. What began as a daughter's embezzlement has escalated into a family-wide pattern of fraud, manipulation, and violence. Most devastating for my parents was the article's description of how they'd mistreated Grandma Rose during her final years. Based on excerpts from the journal she'd kept documenting their emotional and financial abuse. Jessica had somehow obtained access to probate records that included Rose's detailed observations about Margaret's manipulation and isolation tactics. The elderly victim documented systematic financial abuse by family members who were supposed to be caring for her well-being. The article stated, her final will represented an attempt to protect her assets from being used to enable destructive behavior patterns that were harming multiple family members. The newspaper story created immediate consequences for my parents' catering business that were far more severe than their existing financial problems. Within 24 hours of the article's publication, Sunset Celebrations lost 6 major contracts as clients canceled events, rather than be associated with people involved in criminal activities. We can't risk having our wedding reception catered by people who've been accused of fraud, explained bride-to-be Sarah Mitchell, who canceled a contract worth $12,000. Our guests would be uncomfortable knowing about the criminal allegations. Corporate clients were even less tolerant of the scandal. Henderson Manufacturing canceled their annual holiday party contract, while First National Bank withdrew from a catering agreement for their customer appreciation event. The bank's spokesperson explained that they couldn't maintain business relationships with vendors facing criminal fraud charges. Our reputation for integrity is fundamental to our success in the financial services industry, the spokesperson said. We must avoid any associations that could raise questions about our judgment or values. The social consequences were equally devastating for my parents. Margaret was asked to resign from her volunteer position coordinating charity events at St. Mark's Lutheran Church, where the congregation felt her criminal activities made her unsuitable for handling donated funds or organizing community gatherings. While we believe in forgiveness and redemption, we also have a responsibility to protect our parishioners and our church's assets, explained Pastor David Williams. Margaret's involvement in fraud and manipulation makes it inappropriate for her to continue in positions of trust within our community. My parents' longtime friends began distancing themselves from the family scandal, refusing to return phone calls and declining social invitations. Barbara Nielsen, the flower shop owner who'd warned me about their financial problems, described the community's reaction during a follow-up conversation. People are shocked by how far your parents were willing to go to get money they felt entitled to, Barbara said. Margaret and Robert were always seen as solid, reliable people who ran an honest business. Finding out they were willing to commit fraud and steal from elderly relatives has really changed how people view their character. The newspaper article also attracted attention from other victims of the gambling fraud ring that Amanda had been part of. Several business owners came forward to describe similar theft patterns at their companies, providing law enforcement with additional evidence for prosecuting the entire criminal network. Jessica Chang's follow-up articles explored the broader implications of Amanda's case, examining how gambling addiction and family dysfunction created vulnerabilities that criminal organizations exploited. Her reporting helped establish my sister as the public face of a type of white-collar crime that was becoming increasingly common in professional settings. Amanda Thompson represents a new category of criminal recruit, Jessica wrote in her second article, young professionals with expensive lifestyle habits and family pressure to maintain appearances of success become easy targets for organizations that provide detailed instruction in sophisticated fraud techniques. The media attention completely destroyed any possibility that my family could rebuild their reputation or recover their social standing in our community. They'd become symbols of greed, manipulation, and the corruption of family values for financial gain. My father, Robert, was particularly devastated by the public humiliation. Neighbors reported seeing him crying openly at the hardware store where he'd shopped for decades, apparently overwhelmed by the social consequences of their criminal behavior. He kept apologizing to people and saying that things had gotten out of control. Hardware store owner Frank Martinez told me when I happened to encounter him at the gas station. It was painful to watch a man who used to be so proud and confident reduced to that kind of desperation. The newspaper coverage also attracted attention from creditors and suppliers who'd been struggling to collect payment from sunset celebrations. Seeing the extent of my parents' financial deception in print convinced several companies to pursue immediate legal action, rather than continuing to negotiate payment plans. Within 2 weeks of Jessica Chang's first article, my parents received notices of lawsuits from 4 different suppliers seeking immediate payment of outstanding debts. Their business insurance company also initiated an investigation into whether their criminal activities violated policy terms that could void their coverage. The media attention had transformed my family's private dysfunction into public spectacle that would follow them for years. Regardless of how their legal cases were resolved, they'd lost their reputation, their business relationships, their social connections, and their standing in the community where they'd lived for decades. As I read Jessica's articles and watched the community's reaction unfold, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness about how thoroughly their manipulation and criminality had been exposed. They'd chosen to prioritize short-term financial gain over integrity and family relationships, and now they were facing the full consequences of those choices. The inheritance dispute that had started this cascade of revelations seemed almost secondary now compared to the broader pattern of criminal behavior that had been uncovered. My family had destroyed themselves far more thoroughly than I could have accomplished through any legal action or personal retaliation. Amanda's situation became even more desperate as her criminal case moved toward trial, and the media attention made her a recognizable figure throughout the city. Facing potential prison time, financial ruin, and complete social disgrace, she made one final attempt to manipulate the family crisis to her advantage, using the most emotionally devastating tactics she could devise. The call came at 2:30 in the morning, 3 weeks after Jessica Chang's articles had destroyed what remained of our family's reputation. My phone rang with a call from the county jail, and Amanda's voice was barely recognizable through her sobbing when I answered. "Trina, please help me," she whispered, her words slurred and desperate. "I can't take this anymore. I've swallowed pills, and I'm gonna die if you don't drop all the charges and give me half of Grandma's inheritance." The words hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything Amanda had done to hurt our family, the thought of her actually dying felt unbearable. Whatever anger I felt toward her behavior, she was still my sister, and suicide threats required immediate action, regardless of our personal conflicts. "Amanda, what pills did you take? How many?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes and car keys. "It doesn't matter what kind," she replied, her voice growing weaker. "I took enough to finish this, but I'll call for help if you promise to fix everything you've done to our family." I called 911 while driving toward the county detention center, reporting a potential suicide attempt and requesting immediate medical attention for an inmate. Emergency services assured me that jail medical staff would respond within minutes, but I needed to get there to provide information about Amanda's mental state and recent behavior. The 20-minute drive to the jail felt like hours as I struggled with conflicting emotions about Amanda's suicide threat. Part of me recognized that this could be another manipulation attempt, given her history of lying and emotional blackmail, but the possibility that she might actually be dying made it impossible to ignore her call for help. Dr. Michael Santos, the jail's attending physician, met me in the medical facility's waiting area after Amanda had been examined and treated. His expression was carefully neutral as he explained what they discovered during their evaluation. "Your sister did ingest a substantial quantity of pills," Dr. Santos confirmed. "However, the substance she consumed was calcium carbonate, antacid tablets, not any kind of dangerous medication." The revelation that Amanda had faked her suicide attempt using harmless stomach medication left me feeling manipulated and furious. She deliberately terrified me into believing she was dying, calculating that the threat of her death would guilt me into surrendering my inheritance and dropping the criminal charges against her. She consumed approximately 20 tablets, which is enough to cause stomach discomfort but poses no serious health risk, Dr. Santos continued. The timing and method of her ingestion suggest this was a calculated gesture rather than a genuine suicide attempt. Amanda had apparently hoarded antacid tablets from the jail commissary over several days, waiting for the right moment to stage her dramatic manipulation. She'd even practiced slurring her speech and sounding weak to make her fake overdose more convincing during our phone conversation. "Has she made any other suicide threats or shown signs of genuine self-harm behavior?" I asked. Dr. Santos shook his head. "Her psychological evaluation shows signs of personality disorders and manipulative behavior patterns, but no indicators of actual suicidal ideation. This appears to have been entirely performative." The fake suicide attempt represented a new low in Amanda's willingness to use emotional manipulation to avoid consequences for her criminal behavior. She'd been willing to terrorize me with the threat of her death, knowing that guilt and family loyalty would make me vulnerable to her demands. Dr. Elizabeth Turner, the jail's consulting psychiatrist, interviewed Amanda after the medical evaluation and provided additional insight into her mental state and motivations. "Your sister exhibits classic symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder combined with antisocial behavior patterns," Dr. Turner explained during our follow-up conversation. "She demonstrates a consistent inability to accept responsibility for her actions and a willingness to exploit emotional relationships for personal gain." Dr. Turner had documented Amanda's fake suicide attempt as evidence of her psychological instability and her potential danger to herself and others. The incident would be included in her pre-sentencing evaluation and could influence the court's decision about appropriate punishment and treatment requirements. Individuals with this combination of personality disorders often escalate their manipulative behavior when they feel cornered or facing consequences they can't control, Dr. Turner warned. "Your sister may become increasingly desperate as her trial approaches, which could lead to more dangerous attempts at manipulation or retaliation." The psychiatrist recommended that I limit my contact with Amanda and take precautions to protect myself from future manipulation attempts. She also suggested that our parents receive counseling to help them understand how their enabling behavior had contributed to Amanda's criminal development. Families dealing with personality-disordered individuals often benefit from education about manipulation tactics and boundary setting, Dr. Turner explained. "Your parents' unconditional support of Amanda's behavior has actually harmed her by preventing her from learning natural consequences for poor choices." The fake suicide attempt marked the end of any sympathy I might have felt for Amanda's situation. She'd crossed a line by using threats of self-harm to manipulate family members, demonstrating that she viewed other people's emotional well-being as tools to be exploited for her benefit. More importantly, the incident revealed that Amanda still believed she could control outcomes through emotional manipulation, rather than accepting responsibility and working toward genuine change. Even facing prison time and social disgrace, she remained focused on finding ways to avoid consequences, rather than addressing the behavior patterns that had created her problems. I left the county jail that night, feeling emotionally drained but absolutely certain about my decisions regarding the inheritance and criminal charges. Amanda had shown me exactly who she was through her actions, and believing her promises or threats would only enable more destructive behavior. The fake suicide attempt would become part of her official record, documented by medical professionals and jail staff as evidence of her manipulative character. When her case went to trial, prosecutors would be able to demonstrate a pattern of deception and emotional manipulation that extended beyond her original embezzlement crimes. As I drove home in the early morning darkness, I realized that Amanda's desperate final gambit had actually strengthened my legal position while simultaneously destroying any remaining emotional hold she might have had over my decision-making process. She'd shown me that no amount of family loyalty or emotional manipulation would ever be enough to satisfy her sense of entitlement, and that enabling her behavior would only lead to more elaborate and dangerous attempts at avoiding accountability. The evidence that had accumulated over the months of Amanda's escalating criminal behavior finally reached critical mass when prosecutor Daniel Hayes decided to expand the charges against my entire family. What had begun as a single embezzlement case had grown into a comprehensive investigation of financial fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy that would reshape all of our lives permanently. The key breakthrough came when Detective Coleman's analysis of Grandma Rose's journal entries provided sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges against my parents for financial elder abuse. Rose's detailed documentation of Margaret's theft from her purse, her isolation from family and friends, and her systematic manipulation created a compelling case for prosecutorial action. Elder financial abuse is one of the fastest growing categories of crime in our jurisdiction. Prosecutor Hayes explained during a meeting at his office. Your grandmother's journal provides extraordinary documentation of systematic abuse that we rarely see in these cases. Hayes had been building cases against the gambling fraud ring that had recruited Amanda, but Rose's journal gave him an opportunity to pursue the family enablers who had created conditions that made Amanda vulnerable to criminal recruitment in the first place. Your parents' financial support of Amanda's expensive lifestyle, combined with their willingness to steal from your grandmother, suggests a family culture that normalized financial dishonesty, Hayes continued. That pattern of behavior contributed directly to Amanda's decision to participate in organized fraud. The prosecutor had also been investigating the fake attorney scheme that my parents had used to try to steal my inheritance. Jonathan Pierce had been identified as Robert Chen, an unemployed construction worker who'd been hired to impersonate an attorney in exchange for $500 in cash. Chen had been arrested 2 days earlier and immediately cooperated with authorities in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony revealed that my parents had provided him with detailed instructions about what to say and had helped him create the forged legal documents that he'd shown me at the coffee shop. Your parents planned this scheme for over a week, Hayes told me. They researched legal terminology, created fake business cards, and coached Mr. Chen on how to present himself as a legitimate attorney. This wasn't a spontaneous bad decision. It was calculated fraud. Based on all the accumulated evidence, Hayes was preparing to file multiple charges against my parents, elder financial abuse for their treatment of Rose conspiracy to commit fraud for the fake attorney scheme, and theft for their unauthorized use of Rose's bank cards after her death. Each of these charges carries significant prison time, Hayes warned. Elder abuse in particular is prosecuted very aggressively because elderly victims are considered especially vulnerable to this type of exploitation. Margaret and Robert were facing potential sentences of up to 15 years in prison if convicted on all charges. Their advanced age wouldn't necessarily protect them from substantial incarceration, especially given the systematic nature of their criminal behavior. The prosecutor offered them an opportunity to negotiate a plea bargain that would reduce their sentences in exchange for full restitution, public apology, and cooperation with ongoing investigations into similar elder abuse cases. We're willing to consider reduced charges if your parents accept responsibility for their actions and agree to make complete financial restitution to the estate, Hayes explained, but this offer is contingent on their full cooperation and genuine demonstration of remorse. Detective Coleman had been working with federal authorities to dismantle the broader gambling fraud ring that had recruited Amanda. Her cooperation with investigators, motivated partly by her fake suicide attempt, backfiring, had provided crucial information about how the criminal network operated. Your sister's testimony has helped us identify at least 12 other businesses where similar embezzlement occurred, Coleman reported. We're preparing arrest warrants for 7 additional suspects and expect to recover over $800,000 in stolen funds. Amanda's willingness to testify against her criminal associates was motivated primarily by self-preservation rather than genuine remorse, but her information was valuable enough to warrant consideration of reduced charges. She would still face significant prison time, but cooperation might reduce her sentence from 8 years to 4 years. The gambling operators who recruited your sister have been using the same tactics to exploit vulnerable young professionals for over 3 years, Coleman explained. Shutting down their operation will prevent dozens of other families from experiencing what yours has gone through. The detectives' investigation had also uncovered evidence that Amanda's gambling debts were larger than originally estimated. She owed nearly $60,000 to illegal bookmakers, and her participation in the embezzlement ring had been driven partly by threats of physical violence if she didn't repay those debts quickly. The people who recruited your sister are genuinely dangerous, Coleman warned. They've been known to use kidnapping, assault, and other violent tactics to collect debts. Amanda's cooperation with our investigation puts her at risk for retaliation. As part of her cooperation agreement, Amanda would be placed in protective custody during trial proceedings and offered relocation assistance after serving her prison sentence. The Witness Protection Services would help her establish a new identity and find employment in a different state, assuming she completed her sentence without further criminal incidents. The comprehensive legal proceedings against my family had created a situation where everyone involved would face significant consequences for their choices. Amanda would serve prison time but might eventually have an opportunity to rebuild her life elsewhere. My parents would face criminal charges but might avoid the longest possible sentences through plea bargaining and restitution. Most importantly for me, the criminal cases had definitively established my legal ownership of Rose's inheritance and eliminated any possibility that my family could challenge my claim through civil litigation. Their criminal behavior had destroyed their credibility and their legal standing to contest the will. Your inheritance is completely secure at this point, Harold Brennan assured me during an update meeting. No court would consider estate challenges from individuals who have been convicted of defrauding the deceased and attempting to steal from the legitimate beneficiary. The legal resolution of our family crisis had taken nearly 6 months from beginning to end, but the outcome was comprehensive and final. Everyone involved would face appropriate consequences for their choices, and the systematic abuse that had characterized our family dynamics for years would finally end. As I prepared for the upcoming trial proceedings, I felt a sense of justice being served that went far beyond the inheritance dispute. Rose's journal had given her a voice from beyond the grave, exposing the truth about how she'd been treated and ensuring that her wishes would be respected. The criminal justice system had recognized the abuse she'd suffered and was holding her abusers accountable in ways that civil litigation never could have accomplished. Her final will hadn't just transferred financial assets, it had triggered a reckoning with family dysfunction that had poisoned relationships for decades. As the criminal cases against my family members moved through the court system, an unexpected development emerged that helped restore my faith in human decency and community support. The publicity surrounding Rose's elder abuse case had resonated deeply with other elderly residents and their families, creating an opportunity for healing that extended far beyond our personal situation. The revelation that Rose had been systematically isolated from friends and neighbors during her final years prompted several community members to come forward with information that they'd been prevented from helping her when she needed support most. Their testimonies provided additional evidence for the criminal cases while also revealing how much Rose had been loved by people outside our immediate family. Dorothy Chen, a retired nurse who'd lived next door to Rose for over 20 years, was among the first to contact Prosecutor Hayes with information about my mother's interference in Rose's social relationships. I tried to visit Rose regularly after she moved to assisted living, Dorothy explained during her testimony preparation, but every time I called to arrange a visit, Margaret would tell me that Rose was having a bad day or that visitors would be too confusing for her mental condition. Dorothy had accepted these explanations, initially assuming that family members would naturally have the best information about Rose's well-being. But she'd grown suspicious when the excuses became increasingly frequent and elaborate. Margaret started saying that Rose didn't remember me anymore and that seeing old neighbors would be upsetting for her. Dorothy continued, "That didn't sound like the sharp social woman I'd known for decades, but I didn't want to cause problems for the family." Retired widower George Martinez, who'd lived across the street from Rose, had experienced similar interference when he'd tried to maintain their friendship during her final years. Rose and my late wife had been close friends since the 1970s, George testified. After my wife passed away, Rose was one of the few people who really understood my grief. I wanted to continue visiting with her, but Margaret made it very difficult. George described multiple instances where he'd been told that Rose was too tired or not feeling well enough for visitors, even when he'd offered to bring her favorite cookies or help with small errands. I started to feel like Margaret thought I was bothering Rose, so I eventually stopped trying to visit, George admitted. Now I realize that Rose probably thought I'd abandoned her when she needed friendship the most. Perhaps the most heartbreaking testimony came from Frank Rodriguez, the mail carrier who'd served Rose's neighborhood for 15 years. Frank revealed that he'd been instructed by Margaret to redirect Rose's mail to her house, rather than delivering it directly to the assisted living facility. Margaret said it would be easier for the family to manage Rose's correspondence and bills from one central location, Frank explained. I thought it was a reasonable arrangement to help an elderly person with her affairs. Frank's testimony revealed that Rose had been prevented from receiving birthday cards, holiday greetings, and personal letters from friends who'd wanted to maintain contact during her final years. Margaret had intercepted dozens of communications that would have shown Rose how much people outside the family cared about her well-being. I delivered several birthday cards addressed to Rose at the assisted living facility, Frank said. When I asked Margaret about forwarding them, she said Rose was too confused to understand personal mail and that it would only upset her. These revelations painted a picture of systematic isolation that was even more cruel than what Rose had documented in her journal. She died believing that friends and neighbors had forgotten about her, when the reality was that they'd been actively prevented from showing their continued affection and support. The community response to learning about Rose's isolation was swift and compassionate. Several neighborhood families organized a memorial service to honor her memory and publicly acknowledge how much she'd meant to people who'd known her for decades. Rose Thompson was a cornerstone of our neighborhood for over 40 years, said community organizer Patricia Williams during the memorial planning. She helped with countless school fundraisers, organized holiday celebrations, and was always available when families needed support during difficult times. The memorial service held at Rose's favorite park, where she'd spent countless hours gardening and feeding birds, drew over 100 people who wanted to share memories and pay their respects. Many attendees expressed regret about not trying harder to maintain contact during her final years, not realizing they'd been systematically prevented from reaching her. If we'd known what was really happening, we would have found ways to support Rose despite her family's interference, said longtime friend Helen Morrison. She gave so much to our community over the years, and she deserved to know how much people loved and respected her. The memorial service provided a healing opportunity for community members who felt guilty about losing touch with Rose, while also creating awareness about elder isolation and abuse that could help protect other vulnerable residents. Local church leader Pastor David Williams used the occasion to announce the formation of a neighborhood watch program specifically designed to identify and prevent elder abuse before it could escalate to the level that Rose had experienced. We're implementing regular check and procedures for elderly residents and their families, Pastor Williams explained. Community members will be trained to recognize warning signs of isolation or financial manipulation, and will have clear procedures for reporting concerns to appropriate authorities. The community response also included practical support for other elderly residents who might be experiencing similar problems. The Rose Thompson Memorial Fund was established to provide resources for seniors who needed assistance with financial management, legal protection, or social connections. Dorothy Chen, George Martinez, and several other neighbors volunteered to serve on the fund's advisory committee, using their personal experience with Rose's situation to help identify and assist other vulnerable community members. Rose's death taught us that we can't assume family members are always acting in elderly relatives' best interests, Dorothy explained. Sometimes the broader community needs to step in to protect people who can't advocate for themselves. The fund's first initiative involved partnering with legal aid services to provide free consultations for elderly residents who had concerns about financial manipulation or family pressure regarding estate planning decisions. We want to make sure other families don't experience the tragedy that occurred with Rose Thompson, said legal aid attorney Maria Santos. Early intervention and community support can prevent situations from escalating to the level of criminal abuse. The community's response to Rose's story had transformed a personal family tragedy into an opportunity for broader social education and protection systems. Her journal and the criminal cases it had prompted became catalysts for positive change that would benefit other elderly residents for years to come. As I participated in the memorial service and watched community members honor my grandmother's memory, I felt profound gratitude for the validation of her worth and the recognition of how poorly she'd been treated by people who should have protected her. The inheritance she'd left me had been important, but the community's acknowledgement of her value as a person and their commitment to preventing similar abuse seemed like an even more meaningful legacy. Rose's final act of changing her will hadn't just transferred money and property, it had exposed a pattern of abuse that needed community attention and response. Her voice from beyond the grave had sparked conversations about elder protection that would help safeguard other vulnerable people in similar situations. With the criminal cases against my family members proceeding toward resolution and the community's overwhelming support for Rose's memory, I faced the most important decision of this entire ordeal: how to use my inheritance in a way that would honor my grandmother's values while creating positive change from the destruction that had consumed our family. The choice I made surprised everyone, including myself, by transforming a story of family betrayal into something that could help protect other vulnerable people from similar experiences. Rather than simply enjoying the financial windfall or using it to build a comfortable personal life, I decided to establish the Rose Thompson Elder Protection Foundation. using $200,000 from the inheritance to fund legal aid, advocacy services, and education programs for other families dealing with elder abuse situations. The foundation's mission reflected everything I'd learned from Rose's journal and the community's response to her story. Too many elderly people were suffering in silence while family members exploited their trust and isolated them from potential sources of help and support. The Rose Thompson Foundation will provide resources that weren't available to my grandmother during her time of need. I explained during the foundation's launch announcement at the community center. No elderly person should have to endure financial abuse, emotional manipulation, or social isolation from the very people who claim to love them. The foundation's first program involved training volunteers to recognize warning signs of elder abuse and providing them with resources to help victims access legal protection and social services. Dorothy Chen and George Martinez both volunteered to serve as community liaisons, using their experience with Rose's situation to help identify other cases that needed intervention. We want to create a network of people who are watching out for elderly community members, Dorothy explained. Sometimes a caring neighbor or friend is the only person positioned to notice when something isn't right in a family situation. The foundation also partnered with Harold Brennan's law firm to provide free legal consultations for elderly residents who had concerns about estate planning, financial exploitation, or family pressure regarding inheritance decisions. Many elderly people don't realize they have legal options when family members are pressuring them to make financial decisions they're uncomfortable with, Harold said during the program launch. The foundation can help connect them with resources to protect their autonomy and their assets. Local news anchor Patricia Williams featured the foundation's launch as an inspiring example of how personal tragedy could be transformed into community benefit. Her coverage attracted attention from other cities dealing with similar elder abuse problems, leading to requests for information about replicating our programs elsewhere. Trina Thompson has turned her family's painful experience into an opportunity to help protect other vulnerable elderly people, Patricia reported. The Rose Thompson Foundation represents the kind of positive response that can emerge from even the most difficult circumstances. The media attention surrounding the foundation brought unexpected support from community members who wanted to contribute time, money, or expertise to help expand our programs. Local banks offered to provide financial literacy workshops for elderly residents, while medical professionals volunteered to conduct wellness checks and safety assessments. Most importantly, the foundation's work began helping real people in situations similar to what Rose had experienced. Our first case involved helping elderly widower Henry Brooks, whose adult son had been systematically stealing his Social Security checks while isolating him from friends and other family members. I thought I was going crazy because I couldn't understand why my money kept disappearing, Henry explained after foundation volunteers helped him access legal protection and financial counseling. I was too embarrassed to tell anyone what was happening, and my son convinced me that I was just getting forgetful in my old age. With the foundation's support, Henry was able to regain control of his finances, reconnect with friends who'd been told he didn't want visitors, and pursue legal action against his son for theft and elder abuse. His case demonstrated exactly the kind of intervention that could have helped Rose if such resources had been available during her time of need. The foundation's success in helping Henry and several other elderly victims attracted attention from Amanda, who was serving her 4-year prison sentence after cooperating with the prosecution of the gambling fraud ring. She wrote me a letter from prison expressing what appeared to be genuine remorse for her role in destroying our family relationships. I know I don't have any right to ask for forgiveness after everything I did to hurt you and Grandma Rose, Amanda wrote, but watching the news coverage of your foundation has made me realize how completely I misunderstood what family loyalty actually means. Amanda's letter described her participation in prison counseling programs and her growing understanding of how her gambling addiction and personality disorders had led to increasingly destructive behavior patterns. I spent years thinking that family meant getting whatever I wanted without consequences, she continued. I never understood that real love sometimes requires saying no and setting boundaries to help people avoid making terrible choices. While I appreciated Amanda's apparent growth and self-reflection, I wasn't ready to resume any personal relationship with her until she demonstrated sustained positive changes over a much longer period. Her history of manipulation made it difficult to trust that her expressions of remorse represented genuine transformation rather than another attempt to gain sympathy. However, Amanda's letter did include an offer that surprised me. She wanted to contribute to the Foundation's work by sharing her story as a cautionary tale about how family dysfunction and addiction could lead to criminal behavior that harmed innocent people. If my experience can help other families recognize warning signs before things get as bad as they did with us, maybe I can create something positive from all the damage I caused, Amanda wrote. After consulting with Foundation board members and criminal justice experts, we agreed to develop an educational program featuring Amanda's story as part of broader discussions about family dynamics, addiction, and financial crime prevention. Her participation would be conducted remotely while she completed her sentence, and her involvement would be contingent on continued demonstration of genuine change. Even my parents, who were serving 18-month sentences after accepting plea bargains for their crimes, eventually expressed interest in supporting the Foundation's work as part of their court-ordered community service requirements. We're ashamed of how badly we failed your grandmother and you, my mother wrote in a carefully worded letter that had been approved by their court-appointed attorney. We hope that working with the Foundation might help us understand how our behavior hurt people and prevent other families from making similar mistakes. Their participation in Foundation programs would focus on helping other families understand how financial pressure and favoritism toward one child could create conditions that led to elder abuse and criminal behavior. Their willingness to share their story publicly represented a level of accountability that I hadn't expected from them. The Foundation's first year of operation exceeded all expectations, helping 37 elderly residents access legal protection, social services, or family mediation resources. We'd prevented an estimated $250,000 in financial exploitation while helping rebuild social connections for isolated seniors throughout our community. The Rose Thompson Foundation has created a model that other cities are adopting to protect their elderly residents, reported Dr. Sarah Coleman, who had left police work to become our program director. What started as one family's tragic experience has become a resource that's helping hundreds of people in similar situations. As I reflected on everything that had happened since that first dinner where I'd placed the inheritance documents on my family's table, I realized that Rose's final gift had been much more valuable than money or property. She'd given me an opportunity to transform pain into purpose and to create the kind of loving, supportive community that she'd always deserved but never received from her own family. The inheritance had turned the tables completely, but not in the way anyone could have predicted. Instead of simply punishing the people who'd hurt Rose and me, it had become the foundation for protecting other vulnerable people and creating positive change that would honor her memory for generations to come. 3 years have passed since that life-changing evening when I placed those legal documents on my family's dinner table, and the transformation in all our lives has been more profound than anyone could have imagined. What began as a story of betrayal, manipulation, and family destruction ultimately became a testament to the power of accountability, genuine redemption, and the possibility of rebuilding relationships on foundations of honesty rather than enabling. Amanda completed her 4-year prison sentence 18 months ago and has been living in Oregon under the Witness Protection Program. Her cooperation with law enforcement helped dismantle the gambling fraud ring, completely leading to the conviction of 12 other defendants and the recovery of over $2 million in stolen funds for victims across multiple states. More importantly, Amanda has demonstrated genuine personal transformation through her consistent participation in addiction counseling, financial responsibility, education, and victim impact programs. She works as a customer service representative for a telecommunications company, lives modestly in a small apartment, and has remained completely free from gambling or criminal activity. "I'm not the same person who destroyed our family 3 years ago," Amanda told me during our first phone conversation since her release. "I understand now that real happiness comes from earning things honestly and building relationships based on truth rather than manipulation." Amanda's involvement with the Rose Thompson Foundation has been invaluable in helping other families recognize warning signs of financial addiction and criminal recruitment. Her willingness to share her story publicly, despite the personal embarrassment, has helped prevent several young professionals from making similar choices when approached by criminal organizations. "I hope that families will learn from my mistakes and intervene before someone they love gets as far into criminal behavior as I did," Amanda said during a recent foundation presentation. "Enabling someone's bad choices isn't kindness. It's actually a form of harm that prevents them from learning and growing. My parents completed their 18-month sentences and have embraced their community service work with the foundation with what appears to be genuine commitment to making amends for their past behavior. They've become powerful advocates for elder protection laws and have helped identify several cases of financial abuse that might otherwise have gone undetected. We spent years thinking that supporting our children meant giving them whatever they wanted without expecting accountability," my father Robert said during a recent family counseling session we all attended. "We confused enabling with love, and that confusion hurt everyone involved, especially Rose." Margaret has been particularly affected by reading Rose's journal and understanding how much pain her manipulation and control tactics had caused. She's undergone extensive therapy to address the personality patterns that led to her abusive behavior, and she's made genuine efforts to rebuild our relationship based on respect rather than guilt or obligation. "I treated my own mother as if she existed to serve our family's financial needs rather than as a person deserving dignity and autonomy," my mother admitted. "That realization has been the most painful part of this entire experience, but it's also been necessary for me to become a better person." My parents have rebuilt their catering business on a much smaller scale, focusing on honest financial practices and realistic growth expectations. They live modestly in a small rental house and have committed to repaying every dollar they stole from Rose's estate, even though the legal settlements didn't require complete restitution. "We want to earn back some measure of respect through our actions rather than just serving our legal sentences and moving on," Robert explained. "The Foundation's work has shown us what genuine service to community looks like." The Rose Thompson Elder Protection Foundation has expanded beyond our initial community and now operates programs in 6 different cities, helping over 300 elderly residents access legal protection and social services annually. We've successfully lobbied for stronger elder abuse laws and have trained more than 2,000 volunteers to recognize and report suspicious family dynamics. Rose Thompson's story has become a catalyst for national conversations about elder protection and family accountability, said Dr. Elizabeth Turner, who serves on our National Advisory Board. "The Foundation's work demonstrates how personal tragedy can be transformed into systemic change that benefits entire communities. Most personally meaningful to me has been the restoration of Grandma Rose's house as a place of warmth, family connection, and community service. Marcus and I were married in Rose's garden last spring. surrounded by the flowers she'd planted decades ago and the friends who'd known and loved her for years. Your grandmother would be so proud of what you've built from her final gift, Harold Brennan said during our wedding reception. She protected her legacy from people who would have wasted it and trusted you to use it in ways that reflected her values of service and genuine care for others. Marcus and I live in the house now, hosting monthly dinners for elder abuse survivors, foundation volunteers, and community members who want to support our work. The dining room where my family once screamed at me to disappear now echoes with laughter and conversations about hope, healing, and positive change. The house has also become a gathering place for my slowly healing family relationships. Amanda visits when she's able to travel safely. My parents join us for foundation events, and we're all learning to interact as adults who take responsibility for their choices rather than family members trapped in destructive patterns. It's taken 3 years, but I finally understand what Grandma Rose was trying to teach us through her will, Amanda said during her last visit. She wasn't punishing us for our mistakes. She was protecting her resources from being used to enable more destructive behavior. These family dinners are nothing like the tense, manipulative gatherings of our past. We discuss foundation work, share updates about personal growth and challenges, and support each other's efforts to build healthier lives. Sometimes we remember Rose together, sharing stories about her kindness, her wisdom, and her strength. The inheritance that caused such destruction has become the foundation for genuine family healing based on accountability rather than enabling. We've learned that real love requires honesty about harmful behavior patterns and commitment to positive change rather than unconditional acceptance of destructive choices. Your family's story illustrates something crucial about human relationships. Dr. Turner observed during a recent foundation board meeting. Sometimes the people who challenge us to grow and change are showing greater love than those who enable our worst tendencies. As I look around Rose's dining room during our monthly gatherings, watching former addicts celebrate recovery milestones, elderly survivors share stories of regaining independence, and family members practice healthy communication skills, I understand the profound wisdom of my grandmother's final decision. She didn't just leave me money and property, she entrusted me with the responsibility to break cycles of manipulation and abuse that had damaged our family for generations. Her inheritance became a test of character that revealed everyone's true values and priorities. The people who proved worthy of trust and love were not necessarily those connected by blood, but those who demonstrated integrity, accountability, and genuine commitment to positive change. My grandmother's legacy continues through every family that avoids elder abuse, every young person who resists criminal recruitment, and every community that becomes more vigilant about protecting its vulnerable members. Standing up for yourself doesn't mean becoming bitter or vindictive toward people who've hurt you. It means protecting your values while remaining open to genuine redemption and positive change. True strength lies not in winning battles against family members, but in transforming pain into purpose and creating the loving, supportive relationships you've always deserved. Rose Thompson's final gift taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when that refusal creates temporary pain and conflict. Real family bonds are built on truth, accountability, and mutual respect rather than manipulation, guilt, and unconditional acceptance of harmful choices. The tables have turned completely, but the victory isn't over my family members who once rejected me. The victory is in discovering that betrayal and injustice can become catalysts for personal growth, community service, and genuine family healing when approached with courage, integrity, and commitment to positive change. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where standing up for what's right created temporary conflict with people you love? How did you navigate the balance between protecting yourself and remaining open to genuine relationship repair? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories about family resilience and personal growth, and share this content with anyone who might benefit from Rose's wisdom about the difference between enabling and genuine love. Thank you for joining me on this journey of transformation and healing. Remember that your worth isn't determined by other people's treatment of you, and that standing up for yourself can sometimes be the most loving gift you give to everyone involved.